Good evening, everyone. In the last session, we completed our discussion related to config server. So can you guys tell me what is a config server and why we need to go for a config server? So if you want to externalize configuration properties from our application, then we can go for config server. As we discussed, our configuration properties will be available in the GitHub repository with the application name. To load the data from the GitHub repository, we are creating one application as a config server application. In that application, we are going to add the dependency and we will configure one annotation, enable config server. Config server application will download the data from the GitHub repository. We will configure GitHub repository URL in the config server application. Then we are going to develop configure client application. Client application nothing but our REST APIs or our microservices. Our microservices will register with the config server. In our microservice, we are going to give the URL of the config server so that it will get the data from the config server based on the application name. What is the benefit we are getting with the config server? What is the benefit we are getting with the config server? The benefit we are getting is whenever we modify some configuration properties, then we no need to recompile and repackage our. All right. Next one. Today's topic is circuit breaker in microservices. The topic is circuit breaker in microservices. What is circuit breaker? Why we need to go for circuit breaker and how to implement circuit breaker by using Spring Boot and microservices. First of all, circuit breaker is a electrical concept. If anybody from EEE background, so those people will know about what is circuit breaker, right? Circuit breaker is a electrical concept. What is the purpose of that circuit breaker in the electrical? Let us see here. Circuit breaker. Let us go for circuit breaker diagrams, images. If you see, this is called as a circuit breaker. That is a electrical concept. This circuit breaker will be available in our homes where the electricity is supplying. The main purpose of this circuit breaker to protect our house electricity when excess power comes or when the low power comes. Suppose we are getting 80 volts power. Assume that 80 watt power is coming to our house regular day. 80 watts power is coming to our house on regular basis. So for our house, power is coming to our house. Correct. 80 watts power coming from transformer. So in our village or in our street, one transformer will be available. That a transformer giving 80 watts power to our house. In our house, electric devices will be available. Electric devices will be available like television, fans, AC, refrigerator, like some electric devices will be available in our house. To run these electric devices, we need power. To run these electric devices in the house, we need power. That power we are getting from transformer. In our street, one transformer will be available. That a transformer will supply the power to our house. In our house, electric devices will be available. Assume that from the transformer, we are getting 80 watts power to our house. For example, all of a sudden, that 80 watts became 300 watts. Then what will happen? That is high voltage. High voltage power is coming to our home all of a sudden. When high voltage power comes all of a sudden, electric devices which are running will get damaged. Suppose if our television is running with 80 watts power, all of a sudden high voltage power supply to our house, all the electric devices will damage. Are you guys getting my point? And so this is high voltage. When high voltage power supply to our house, electric devices will be damaged. For example, 80 watts power we are expecting, but all of a sudden that reduced to 10 watts. Then what will happen? It comes under low voltage. When low voltage is applied, electric devices will damage. So if we get high voltage or if we get low voltage, that will affect on our device. If a high voltage power supplied or if low voltage power supplied, then our electric devices will get damaged in our house. To protect that kind of scenarios, we are going to use circuit breaker in our house. Whenever you call electrician to set up power in your apartment or to set up power in your house, that person will set up one circuit breaker in the main system where the power is getting supplied. What that circuit breaker will do? When high voltage power comes or when low voltage power comes, it will control that. It will not affect them on the electric devices. To overcome the problems which can occur with the high voltage power or low voltage power, we are going to use a concept called circuit breaker. That circuit breaker is a electrical concept. Now you may get a question, sir, this is electrical concept, why we are discussing in the Spring Boot? Circuit breaker is a electrical concept, why we are discussing in the Spring Boot? That is the question. First observe how circuit breaker looks like and how circuit breaker is going to work. Protecting your motors from the faults such as an overload of high voltage, short circuits or relay shutdowns in vital in a age where downtime can happen. When your motor is running, when your TV is running, when your AC is running, if a high voltage power comes or if low voltage power comes, that the device can damage. That is called fault. Devices fault will happen. Here to overcome that fault operation, we are going to use a concept called circuit breaker. Circuit breaker is used to protect circuit breaker is used to handle high voltage or low voltage problems. High voltage or low voltage problems which are occurring can be handled by using circuit breaker. Now, how it is related to our Spring Boot? So here, assume that we are developing one boot application, one microservice. This is one microservice. Assume that this is service A. Let me call this as service A. One microservice is available. And there is another microservice is available with a name called service B. Service A is available and service B is available. Service B contains some logic. Service B contains some logic. Now, whenever a request comes from the user, that request will go to service A. Here, from the UI application, request is coming. Assume that here our UI application is available. These are our backend microservices. So this UI application will be used by end user. UI application will be used by end user. End user will communicate with our UI application. Then UI application will talk to service A. UI application will talk to service A. Now, this service A will communicate with the service B. Service B will communicate with the database. Assume that. So this is our development. So service B will communicate with the database, will get the data from the database, will give to service A. Service A will give the data to the UI. UI will display the data to the end user. Assume that this is our project execution flow. This is our project execution flow. There is a UI application which contains presentation logic. Whenever user send the request, that will go to our UI application. UI application will communicate with the service A. Service A is one microservice. Whenever request comes to service A is communicating with the service B. This is also another microservice. Service B is communicating with the database. It will get the data from the database and it will give the data to service A. Service A will give the data to UI application. UI application will give the data to end user. This is the execution flow. If service A and service B both are working as expected, then no problem. User request can be processed successfully. For example, service B is down. Service B is not working. There is some issue, maybe memory issue, maybe database issue, maybe network issue, maybe server crash. Some reason that service B is not working. When the service B having some problem, then our request can be processed or our request cannot be processed. Our request cannot be processed. What will happen? What will happen when we are trying to process the request? User will send a request that will come to the UI. UI will talk to service A. Service A will talk to service B. But service B giving some exception. Due to some reason, whatever the code is available in the service B, that code is not working as expected. If that code is not working as expected, then service A cannot process the request. It will give error message to the end user. So to overcome these kind of failures, we are going to use a concept called circuit breaker. Circuit breaker is used to handle the scenario where our services are failing to process the request. Whenever a request comes, if the request is not able to process, if request is getting failed in the service B, I don't want to send here service A calling service B. Service B should give some response to service A. If an exception occurs, service B cannot give the response to service A. Here, whenever there is a failure in the service B, I want to handle that failure. I want to execute some fallback logic. When main logic is failed to execute, I want to execute some fallback logic. To execute that fallback logic, we are going to use a concept called circuit breaker. Okay, circuit breaker is an electrical concept. It is used to handle high voltage and low voltage problems occurring with the power. Similarly, here circuit breaker is used to handle circuit breaker is used to handle fault situations. What is the meaning of a fault situation? Failure. Fault situation nothing but failure situation. Fault situation nothing but failure situation. So here service B is available. In the service A, we are writing the logic to call service B. Inside the service B, there is a method. Assume that there is a method called M1 method is available. There is a method called M1 method. M1 method connecting with some database to get the data. Okay, so here service A is available. Inside the service A, I am writing one M2 method. I am writing M2 method in the service A. Service A M2 method calling service B M1 method. If M2 method executed successfully, no problem. Success response will go to the user. For example, M2 method is not able to access M1 method because this is one REST API, this is another REST API. One REST API communicating with the another REST API. When request comes to the service A, M2 method is executed. Inside the M2 method, I am accessing service B by using REST template or by using web client third-party API. So this M2 method failed because it is not able to communicate with the M1. It is not able to access a service B. Service B nothing but one REST API. That REST API not working. So M2 method is failed to execute. When the M2 method is failed to execute, we need to send error response to the client. We need to send error response to the client. Is it recommended to send error response to the client? Is it recommended to send error response to the client? No, it is not recommended to send error response to the client. When M2 method is failed to execute, I want to call M3 method. M2 method contains the logic to access service B. My M3 method contains fallback logic. What is the meaning of fallback logic? When main logic is failed to execute, then I want to execute alternate logic. Alternate logic is called as fallback logic. So in order to handle fault or failure situations in the applications, we are going for a concept called circuit breaker. You may ask a question like this. You may get a question like this. For example, I'm having one method, public string M2. Public string M2 method is available. Inside the M2, I have logic to call service B using REST template. Okay, and I want to return some string as a response to the UI. This is my logic, guys. This is my logic in the service A. Inside this M2, I am writing some logic to call service B by using REST template. For example, if service B is down, if it is not working, then M2 will execute successfully or M2 will not execute successfully. M2 will not execute successfully. When the M2 method having a problem, I want to call M3 method. Inside the M3 method, I will write some alternate logic. I will write some alternate logic. This is my original method. This is my fallback method. What is the meaning of fallback method? What is the meaning of fallback method? Yes. If original method is not working, then only I want to execute my fallback method. If there is some problem in the original method, then I want to go for fallback method. If some exception occurs in the original method, then I need to go for my M3 method. You can say like this, sir, when there is a problem in the M2, then we need to call the M3. Why we need to go for circuit breaker? Why can't we go for try-catch block? Right? So here, when there is a problem in the M2 method, you can write a try-catch block. Whenever exception occurs in the try block, it will go to the catch block. Inside the catch block, I can call the M3 method. Then why should I go for circuit breaker? Do you have that question? Now we need to understand real power of the circuit breaker. Okay, guys? So here, I can write the code like this. I can write the code like this. Try block. Inside the try block, I can keep the logic to access service B, and I will write catch block. Some exception occurred. Then it will come to the catch block. In the catch block, what I will do? I will call return M3. I will call return M3. Now tell me what will happen in this logic. Now tell me what will happen with this logic. First, a request will come from the UI. Request will come from the UI. Request will go to M2 method. Inside the M2, I'm using logic to call service B by using REST template. If it is working successfully, no problem, then I will return the response from the original method. For example, service B, another REST API, not working. If service B not working, exception will occur in the try block. If exception occurred in the try block, immediately it will go to catch block. What I am doing in the catch block, I am calling M3 method. Then what will happen? Alternate logic will be executed. So whenever exception occur in the M2, I want to call the M3. For that, try catch is sufficient, circuit breaker not required. Yes or no? My requirement is when exception occur in the M2 method, then I want to execute M3 method. That is called fallback logic. That is called fallback logic. Now let us understand problem with this code. First request came to M2 method. Service B is down. Service B not working. Request came from the UI to the service A. Inside the service A, M2 method is executed, try block, logic to call service B down, request failed, exception occurred. When exception occurred in the try block, immediately it will go for catch block. Inside the catch block, what I am calling M3. It will go to M3. M3 logic will be executed. M3 output will be sent to the UI. One request is completed. Then again, second request came for the service A. Again, M2 method is executed. Exception occurred. Catch block. M3 called. M3 gave the output. Response sent to the UI. Third request came to the service A. Again, M2 method executed. Exception occurred. Then again going to catch block. Execute the M3. Response is sending. Fallback logic. Like this, we got 100 requests within 1 minute of time. When we get 100 requests are failed in the try block. They executed catch block. Then M3 method called for 100 requests. When 100 requests are failed, our application monitoring team will be available. They will monitor the logs of the application. 100 requests failed continuously because service B is down. Service B is a third-party company. We call to them, boss, today morning onwards, your service B not working because of your service B, our service A requests are failing. Our service A requests are failing. They told that we are having some SSL certificate issue. We will take 24 to 48 hours of time to resolve that issue. Then what will happen for the next 48 hours? What will happen? Can I tell to end users? There is a certificate issue. End users are keep on accessing our application. Requests are coming. Request will go to M2 method. It will fail. Then go to catch block. Second request fail. Go to catch block. Third request fail. Go to catch block. Is this recommended to execute every time? Try logic which is already failing. Then execute the catch block. Is it recommended or not recommended? Recommended or not recommended? Not recommended. What we need to do is, in the real time, what people will do? Observe carefully. Service A is talking to service B. Service A talking to service B. In the service A, M2 method is available. Whenever request comes, M2 method will be executed. Inside the M2 method, I am writing some logic to call the service B. If service A having some problem in the M2 method, then I want to execute M3 method. So if I write try catch block, what is the problem? Every time try block will execute, that the try block will fail, then only it will go for catch block. Every time try block will execute, if there is a problem in the try block, then only it will go for catch block. 24 hours, service B not working. 48 hours, service B not working. Always the try block will execute. It will fail in the try block. Then we need to go for catch block. Is it recommended solution or it is not recommended solution? Recommended solution or not recommended solution? It is not a recommended solution. That's where circuit breaker comes into picture. What we can achieve by using circuit breaker? So here inside the service A, I will configure one circuit breaker for M2 method. I will configure one circuit breaker for M2 method. For this circuit breaker, I will tell that, hey circuit breaker, you observe all the requests which are coming. You observe all the requests which are coming. Suppose if, observe carefully guys, this 2 minutes very important. Why we need to go for circuit breaker? Observe all the requests which are coming to M2 method. Observe, I don't need to write any try block or catch block. Remove this try block and catch block. Observe all the requests which are coming to M2 method. If 5 requests are failing continuously, 5 requests are failing continuously, then don't call the M2 method, because 5 requests are failed continuously means 6th request also will fail, seventh request also will fail, eighth request also will fail. If 5 requests are failing continuously, then don't call the M2 method for the sixth request. For the sixth request, directly call the M3 method. You directly call the M3 method from the sixth request onwards. Sometime 30 minutes you go for only M3 method. After 30 minutes, again send 5 requests to M2 method. If they are successful, continue with the M2 method. If they are not successful, continue with the M3 method. That's where we are going to use circuit breaker in our application. What is a circuit breaker? Circuit breaker is used to handle fault or failure situations in our microservices. Circuit breaker is a design pattern. Circuit breaker is a design pattern to develop fault tolerance applications. Fault tolerance applications. What is the meaning of fault tolerance? What is the meaning of fault tolerance? If there is a failure, without sending error message, say process that request with the fallback logic and send some response to the client. Whenever a request comes to the M2 method, if some problem occurred in the M2 method, instead of sending error message to the client, we need to send some fallback logic response. Okay. If I go for try catch block, what is the problem? Always it will go to try block, it will fail. When it is failed, then it will go to catch block. In the catch block, I am going to call M3 method. I don't want to execute try block every time. When it is failing, what is the use of executing the try block? That's where we are going to configure circuit breaker for the M2 method. How we are going to configure circuit breaker? I will write one annotation, circuit breaker. What is the name of our circuit breaker and what is our fallback method? What is our fallback method? My fallback method is M3. My fallback method is M3. For M2 method, I am writing a circuit breaker. What is the benefit with this? What is the benefit with this? Right. You no need to write the try and catch block. When a request is failed in the M2, then it will go for M3. Now I will write some circuit breaker config properties. I will write some circuit breaker config properties. What is the purpose of circuit breaker configuration properties? When to execute M2 method, when to execute M3 method. For how many requests we need to monitor? When 5 requests are continuously failed with the M2, don't call the M2 method. Directly go for the M3 method for 30 minutes of time. After 30 minutes, again send 5 requests to M2 method. If they are failed, then again go for M3 method. If 5 requests are successful, then continue with the M2 method only. So that is called fault tolerant application. To develop fault tolerant applications, we are going for circuit breaker. Nowadays, people are calling as resilience applications. Fault tolerance applications are also called as resilience applications. That means whenever there is a failure in the application, then immediately fallback logic will be executed. So now when we go for circuit breaker, there are 3 statuses. Circuit breaker works based on below modes. State. Circuit breaker will have below 3 states. One is closed state. Okay. Second one is open state. Third one is called off open. What are the states available for the circuit breaker? There are 3 states available for circuit breaker. What are those 3 states in the circuit breaker? First one is closed state. second one is open state, third one is off open state. So let's understand what is closed, what is open, and what is off open. Now here service A is communicating with service B. Okay, so service B having some logic, guys. Service A is available, service B is available. Inside the service A, M2 method is available, M3 method is available. I configured request monitor 5 requests. Monitor 5 requests. In these 5 requests, if the 5 requests are failed, then my circuit breaker should come into picture. When the main logic is failing, then fallback logic should be executed. When the fallback logic should be executed, we are going to write some configuration properties for that. First observe, initially service A, service B, both are up and running successfully. Service A is running, service B also running. A request came from the user, it came to UI application. From the UI, request came to service A, M2 method is executed. M2 method communicated with the service B. Service B responded successfully. Response came to service A gave the response to service B. Service A nothing but one REST API. Service B nothing but one REST API. They are able to communicate with each other. Service A able to access service B successfully. When these APIs are working successfully, then there is no need of our circuit breaker. Then circuit breaker will be in the closed status. Are you guys clear? My circuit breaker will be sleeping when my 2 APIs are working as expected. Request came to service A communicated with the service B executed successfully. It gave the response to service A, that is successful request processing. When our requests are processing successfully, our circuit breaker status will be closed status. Okay guys, now assume that second scenario. Request came from the UI to the service A. Service A accessed service B, it is not responding. Service B is down. First request, it failed. Whenever the requests are continuously failing, I have given the limit as 5. So if 5 requests are failed continuously, then my circuit breaker will come to open state. What is the meaning of open state? When the circuit breaker is in the open state, nothing but instead of executing M2 method, it will execute M3 method directly, because M2 method is already failing. When the M2 method failed 5 times continuously, then why to go for M3? Right? I mean, when the M2 method is failing, why to execute M2 again and again? Directly I want to execute M3. So whenever the given limit is crossed with the failure request, I told if 5 requests are failed, my circuit breaker should work. If 5 requests are failed, then my circuit breaker will go to open state. What is the meaning of open state? There is a problem in the application. If a circuit breaker is in the open state, there is a problem in the application. Whenever there is a problem in the application, instead of executing the M2 method, directly it will execute the M3 method. Now, sometime it will execute only M3 method. After some time, again, limited number of requests will go to service B. Limited number of requests I will send to service B to check service B working or not. So whenever the limited number of requests are going for testing purpose, that circuit breaker status will be off open, closed, open, and off open. What is the meaning of closed? Requests are closing, requests are processing successfully, circuit breaker no need to do anything. When service A is able to communicate with the service B successfully, When service A communicating with the service B successfully, circuit breaker no need to do anything, then status of the circuit breaker will be closed status. Okay. Suppose for example, service A is not able to communicate with the service B. There is some exception in the M2 method. M2 method not able to access the service B. Okay. I have given the limit as a 5. 5 requests are failed. If 5 requests are failed continuously, then circuit breaker will come to open state. When the circuit breaker is open, instead of executing the original method, it will execute my fallback method. Why it will execute only fallback method? Original method is failing. Original method is failing. As original method is failing, it will execute only fallback method. When the fallback method is executing, circuit breaker status will be open. Okay. For some time, only my fallback method is executing. After some time, I want to test again service B is up and running or not. So M2 method will be executed. So when the M2 method is executed for 5 test requests to test circuit breaker is already open. Fallback logic is executing. But I cannot execute only fallback logic for lifelong, right? My actual project requirement, M2 method should be executed. There is a problem in the M2. For some time, I executed my fallback logic. After processing some requests, again I should check M2. M2 is working as expected or not. So that time, limited number of requests will go to M2 method. Large number of requests will go to M3 method. When the circuit breaker is open, all the requests will go to M3. Okay. After some time, circuit breaker will come to off open state. What is the meaning of off open? Limited number of requests will go to M2 for testing purpose. If M2 not working, again it will come to open state. What is the meaning of open state? M3 method will execute. Suppose circuit breaker sending off open status, limited number of requests to M2. By that time, service be up and running, M2 method successful, then circuit breaker will go to closed state. Are you guys clear? Now do you understand difference between try catch and circuit breaker? So what is the problem with the try catch? What is the problem with the try catch? Every time M2 method will execute, it will fail, go to M3 method. If it is circuit breaker, it will work based on the status. What are the 3 statuses available? One is closed status, second one is open status, third one is off open status. Closed state, off open. What is the meaning of a closed state? What is the meaning of closed state? Our services are up and running. Circuit breaker no need to do anything. In that scenario, circuit breaker will be in the closed state. What is the meaning of open state? What is the meaning of open state? Right. There is a problem. Circuit breaker open, then only my fallback logic is going to execute. Then next one, off open state is available. What is the meaning of off open state? Limited number of requests will go to M2 method. If they fail, then again come to open. If they are successful, it will go to closed status. Are you guys clear? Good. Now, I have done this implementation, guys. So I kept that project in the GitHub repository. Let me go to GitHub. Yeah. So here in the GitHub repository, I added one project with a name called Spring Boot Circuit Breaker. So let me go to this project. Sorry, before that, I have given one document, guys. Circuit breaker doc is available. What document I prepared with the circuit breaker? Theoretical points. Let me download this document. I'm downloading. Okay. So that is just what document where I explained that what is circuit breaker and all. It is downloading. It is taking time. 5 requests will come to M2, they will fail. When they fail, M3 will execute for those also. You no need to call circuit breaker. Here I have given fallback method. So whenever I specify this annotation, whenever M2 failed, directly it will go to M3. 5 requests will execute here, will execute here also. After 5, directly only this one will execute. Guys, give me 5 minutes. I will be back. So there is a interview for the person. Just let me check it once. I will be back in 5 minutes. Online people, please download that document in the GitHub repository about circuit breaker. Please go through that. Please go through that one. We are trying to understand circuit breaker. Have you gone through this document? So what you understood? What you understood? Circuit breaker is used to develop fault tolerant system. What is the meaning of fault tolerant system? Right. Whenever there is a problem in our application, instead of giving error response to the client, we want to execute a fallback logic. For that, we are going to implement circuit breaker. For the circuit breaker, there are 3 states are available. What are the 3 states available for circuit breaker? Closed state, open state, off open state. What is the meaning of closed state? When the both services which are interacting are up and running, circuit breaker is closed. Circuit breaker will just count the number of API calls continuously. How many calls are happening from service A to service B? Circuit breaker will be counting them when the status of the circuit breaker is closed. What is the meaning of open? What is the meaning of open? Right. As soon as the percentage of failing remote API call is exceeding the given threshold, if I given 5, if the requests are failed more than 5, then the circuit breaker status will change to open. Calling microservice will fail immediately, exception will be returned. That means the flow is interrupted. So here, A service trying to access B service, but there is a failure, then circuit breaker will come to open state. Then next one, there is another status called off open state. What is the meaning of off open state? What is the meaning of off open state? After staying at open state for given timeout period, breaker will automatically turns into off open state. In this, limited number of API calls are allowed to pass through. If both are working as expected, then status will be in the closed. Nothing but circuit breaker, no need to do anything. For example, circuit breaker is running and service A trying to access service B. There is a failure. Then breaker will come into open state. When the breaker comes into open state, instead of executing the M2 method, it will execute only M3 method. After some time, it will send a limited number of requests to the M2 method. If the requests are failing, status will come to from off open to open. If the requests are working, off open to closed status. Right. So if you see here, this is the architecture for our circuit breaker. Closed status, open status, off open status. Closed. When number of remote call failure is greater than the given threshold, I have given 5%. If 5 requests are failed continuously, from the closed state, it will go to open state. After timeout period, it will come to off open. When it is coming to the off open, if limited number of calls are succeeding, it will go to closed. If a limited number of calls are failing, then again it will go to open state. So these are 3 states of circuit breaker: closed, open, off open. Closed means working as expected, no need to do anything. When the given threshold is matched with the failure request, it will go to open. When the circuit breaker is in the open, it will, after some time, it will come to off open. When it is in the off open, it will check some test requests, limited number of requests. If they are success, go to close. If they are failed, go to open. Fine. Now, here, in order to implement a circuit breaker, we are using a concept called resilience for J. So earlier, we used a concept called Hystrix circuit breaker, guys. Earlier, we used a concept called Hystrix circuit breaker. Hystrix circuit breaker concept we used earlier in the Spring Boot, but currently Hystrix concept is outdated. Resilience for J came into picture. By using this resilience for J library, we can implement a circuit breaker for fault tolerance. Resilience for J is a lightweight, easy to use fault tolerance library inspired by Netflix Hystrix. Hystrix got outdated and currently people are going for resilience. Now here, when I am going for circuit breaker, I'm going to develop 2 applications, guys, related to loan application. One is rate service, another one is loan service. Rate service is available, loan service is available. Loan service will send a request to rate service. Rate service will process the request, will send the response to loan service. If rate service is down, I want to bring a circuit breaker into picture. In order to configure circuit breaker, we need to configure these properties in the YML file. Could you please read the properties? So these are the circuit breaker configuration properties. These are the circuit breaker configuration properties. So what is the meaning of failure rate threshold? With the given number, if the 50% of requests are failed, circuit breaker will go to open state. Now, minimum number of calls 5. Automatic transition from open to off open enable. So whenever it is open, automatically it should go to off open state. When it should go to off open state, after 5 seconds, if it is in the open state, then immediately go for off open. Permitted number of calls in the off open state 3. That means once the circuit breaker is in the off open state, I will send 3 requests back to this Rail API. If 3 fail, again open. If 3 success, then closed state. So these are the properties we need to configure in our circuit breaker application. Based on the properties, it will decide when to call M1 method, when to call M2 method available in our API. If I configure circuit breaker, whenever a request comes to service A, when to call the M2, when to call the M3. M2 method contains the logic to access service B. If service B is down, M2 method will fail. M2 method failed 5 times, then directly circuit will open, M3 method will be called. After 5 seconds, again it will call the M2 3 times. If it is success, continue. If it is fail, then open the circuit. So this is circuit breaker concept. What is the purpose of circuit breaker? To develop fault tolerant system. It is also called as resilience system. What is the meaning of fault tolerant system? What is the meaning of fault tolerant system? When there is a failure, then we need to execute the fallback logic for that. Clear? So theoretically we understood programming. It is already there in the GitHub repository, guys. If you want to give it a try, you can do that. Source code also I have already uploaded in the GitHub repository. If you want to give it a try, you can do that. Tomorrow we will understand coding for circuit breaker. So there is nothing to deal with the circuit breaker. The only thing is you need to add these properties and you need to write one annotation. That's it. You don't need to do anything extra. You just need to write one annotation called circuit breaker and you need to write the configuration properties like this. With that, circuit breaker will work in our APIs. So tomorrow we will develop the project with the circuit breaker. Fine, guys. Good. So with this, I'm stopping for today. We'll meet in the tomorrow's class. Thank you.